Hello everyone! Have you heard traditional stories from your grandparents or elders in your family? Aren't they very captivating? In this video, we will read one such traditional story in the form of a poem, A Legend of Northland, written by American poet Phoebe Cary. This poem narrates the legend of an old lady who angered Saint Peter because of her greed. A legend is an old traditional story. The form of this poem is ballad. A ballad is a song narrating a story in short stanzas. Ballads are a part of folk culture or popular culture, and they are passed on orally from one generation to another. You must have heard some ballad from your grandparents or elders. A Legend of Northland is a ballad which is written in 16 short stanzas, each consisting of 4 lines. Now let's read the poem. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. The poet says that far in the north, the days are very small and the nights are very long in the winter, so long that people cannot even sleep throughout the night. Where they harness the swift reindeer. Harness means the reindeers are tied to the sledges through ropes. They are used for transportation. Swift means one who runs very fast. Reindeers are animals that are used at snowy places for transportation. To the sledges. Sledge is a vehicle which is often pulled by animals, which is used for transportation or carrying load when it snows. So they use swift reindeers to carry their loads during winter when it snows. And the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. And the children are all covered up with furry clothes so that they look like bear cubs. Children of bear rather than human. They are completely covered in their furry clothes. So far in the north, the days are very small and nights are very long in winter, and people use reindeers to carry their load, and children are all covered in furry clothes, so in such a way that they look like bear cubs. Before proceeding, let's see the poetic devices of these stanzas. First, we will see rhyming scheme. For rhyming scheme, we have to see the last word of each line. In the first line, the last word is Northland. In the second line, it is few. In the third line, winter. And in fourth line, it is through, which rhymes with few. Hence, the rhyming scheme of this stanza is ABCB. This rhyming scheme is maintained throughout the poem. Hence, the rhyming scheme of all the stanzas is ABCB only. Now, let's see figure of speech. First, in the very first line, the word away, away is repeated. So, there is repetition. Now, in this line, that they cannot sleep them through, there is repetition of the sound, look like l sound, and funny, furry, fur sound. Hence, there is alliteration. Now, in this line, and the children look like bear's cub. Children are compared to bear's cub. Hence, there is simile because the word like is used for comparison. Now, let's see next stanza. They tell them a curious story. Curious means strange. They tell a strange story. That means people there, they tell a strange story. I don't believe this true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. The poet says that I don't believe this story is true, but it tells a story. It teaches us something. Hence, you should listen to it. Once when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below. Saint Peter was a disciple of Jesus Christ. So the poet says once when Saint Peter lived in the world and walked about it preaching just as he did. You know, preaching means giving religious knowledge. So he was roaming all around the world giving religious knowledge. Here in this line, they, then, them, the sound is repeated. Yet you, your sound is repeated. Learn a lesson, l sound. And tell the tale, the sound again. Hence, there is a lot of alliteration in these stanza. He came to the door of a cottage and travelling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Saint Peter was travelling round the world giving religious knowledge. While doing so, he came to the doorstep of a small house, where there was a little woman who was making cakes and she was baking them on the hearth. Hearth is a fireplace for cooking. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Saint Peter was traveling round the earth, and the day was almost done that day, and he was faint with fasting. He had not eaten anything and he was feeling very weak. And the day was almost over. So he asked that woman to give him a cake from her store, to give him a single cake. In this line, where a little woman was, were sound is repeated. Faint with fasting, for sound is repeated. So there is alliteration. We are doing figure of speeches along with the stanza so that you don't get confused in the end, and you can mark it here only. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. So as Saint Peter asked for a cake, she baked a very small cake, and as it was there in the hearth, it was baking, she looked at the cake and she said, it is too large to give away. It seemed very large to give away to somebody. Therefore, she kneaded another. Kneaded means she made a dough from flour and she made another cake. And still a smaller one, which was smaller than the previous one. But it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. She kneaded a new cake and it was smaller than the previous one. But as she turned it over on the hearth, she saw that it was as large as the first one. It was not small. So the lady felt that the cake was not small. So she, and still a smaller, sir sound. So there is alliteration. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough. Scrap is a very small portion. And rolled it flat. Then she took a very small portion of dough and then rolled it, and she rolled it very flat and baked it thin as wafer, but she couldn't part with it. And she baked it. It was very small portion of dough, so the cake was very thin as a wafer. But she couldn't part with it. But she again could not give it away. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself, and yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. She could not give that thin cake also, because she said, my cakes that look so small when I eat them myself look so large when I have to give them away to somebody for free. So she could not part any of her cake, even the smallest and the thinnest one. Now in this line, rolled and rolled is repeated. So there is repetition. Thin as wafer, there is simile as cake is compared to wafer. And then we have tiny, seem too small, sir sound. And so she, there is alliteration. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. Provoke means to aggravate or increase anger. Saint Peter was seeing all this the woman was doing, and he grew very angry. He was very angry that this greedy woman cannot give a small portion. He was already hungry, he was already weak, and such greedy woman was enough to increase the anger of a saint. And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. So he said, you are a very selfish woman, so selfish that you cannot exist in human form and get all the pleasure of life, food and shelter and warmth. You do not deserve it. Dwell means to exist. So he said, you cannot exist in the form of a human. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food. Scanty means a small portion of. So he said, now you will build your own house as the birds do, and you will find your little amount of food yourself by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. So you will do it, you will find your food by boring. That means digging and digging and digging the whole day in the wood. In the dry wood, you will keep digging as the birds do. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. And at that very moment, the woman went up from the chimney of her house. She went up through the chimney. She couldn't speak a word. She did not say anything. She went up through the chimney, and from the top of the chimney came a bird, a woodpecker, because the woman had changed to bird because of the saint's curse. Now here boring means to dig. Built as birds, burr sound is repeated, so there is alliteration. Boring and boring and boring, boring word is repeated, so there is repetition. She had a scarlet cap on her head and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned black as coal in the flame. The woman was wearing a scarlet. Scarlet is deep red color, brilliant red color cap. She was wearing a brilliant red color cap which remained the same, and the rest of her clothes and body, they were completely burned as flame. They became black like coal. And every country school boy has seen her in the wood where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. Everybody, all the people in the world, they have seen this woman as she is found in the wood, in the trees, boring and boring throughout the day. Everybody has seen her living on the trees, and this is how woodpecker was born. So she was wearing a scarlet cap which remained the same, and rest of her clothes were burned, and she went up through the chimney, came out as a woodpecker, and everybody has seen her on the trees as she keeps boring throughout the day, digging in the trees looking for food, and she builds her own home. So this is how St. Peter's curse had affected the woman, and this is the legend which is passed from one generation to another. The poem is a ballad. Now here we have the word boring and boring repeated, so there is repetition. So this was the poem A Legend of Northland. Have you heard any such traditional stories from anyone in your family or outside? Do share it in the comment section. This is about the poem. I'll see you in my next video. Till then, bye bye. Take care.